Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 2nd of September 2024. So much content coming out today on a massive US elections special that I've done, and all the usual Ukraine stuff, and I haven't had a chance to map either. It's just, too much information, not enough time. Okay, we're going to start with the geopolitics subject with Turkey, and there's quite a lot going on geopolitically actually at the moment as well. So Turkey is formally asked to join the BRICS groups at Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. There have been Saudi Arabia, Zimbabwe, a whole host of other nations on the peripheries, both geographically and I guess in terms of power and influence around the world, vying to join BRICS. This is something of where I've talked about this before, and some people laugh at BRICS, say they're never going to replace the dollar. They're never going to be successful competitors to US hegemony. But then you look at how far China's come in 20 years, and it's not about whether this is going to happen in 2-3 years time. This is about 50 years time. What's the world going to look like then? And will it be a hegemony where Russia and China, as autocratic nations, if they don't change their ways, will be trying to rule the world in a way that is not morally upstanding? Not to say that the Americans are the morally virtuous zenith of humanity, but of those two options, BRICS versus the US, I would take the US every day of the week. So Turkey, as a member of NATO and also a once aspiring potential for the EU, are looking to go the other way now and to join BRICS, and they have a foot firmly on each side of the fence. Just not too sure about this. I reckon this has probably got a lot of people around the world, certainly in NATO and the EU and the US, slightly worried here. So Turkey's incredibly important in terms of its geographical positioning in essentially the center of the world in so many ways. So it connects the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, to the Black Sea, in terms of being close to there. It's north to south, east to west, Europe to the Middle East, Europe to Asia, Asia to Africa, Europe to Africa. Turkey is just right there, and obviously then the Black Sea too, controls through the Montreux Convention the Black Sea in many ways. So Turkey's massively important, and it's struggling at the moment. It is financially in a lot of trouble. Erdogan was lucky to get back in again, considering he was doing making a real pig's ear of the economy, and then has continued to do so. Inflation there is bad. I mean, you think it's bad in wherever you guys live, unless you're in Argentina. Then think about it in Turkey. I think it was around 60% or something. Really bad inflation in Turkey, and it could be that this is out of economic necessity. I don't know, but anyway, they formally asked to join that group, seeking to bolster its global influence and forge new ties beyond the traditional Western allies, according to the people familiar with the matter. Bloomberg talks about it. Turkey bids to join BRICS in a push to build alliances beyond the West. Bloc is set to discuss expansion at a summit in Russia in October. So there'll be a number of different nations that will be looking to join in that time. Turkey's been frustrated by lack of progress to join in a bid to join the EU. However, that lack of progress is going to be largely down to themselves. So when you look at what's been happening in terms of freedom of press, in terms of democratic institutions in Turkey, they need to jump through hoops in order to join the EU. You do all of those things, and you're going to put yourself in a much better position to do so. But if you have Erdogan ruling, and you're not looking like it's as free and fair electorally as it could and should be, then you're going to have trouble joining the EU, and that frustration is potentially, at least somewhat, in laying in the feet of the Turkish themselves, or at least the ruling party, Erdogan in Turkey. Now, Anton Gerashchenko talks about Putin going to Mongolia. This is supremely important, far more important than you might think. So the question is, Putin can go to a number of places around the world, not everywhere because of the Rome Statute, and he's got a warrant on his head from the International Criminal Court. Now, Mongolia is a signatory to the Rome Statute, and technically he should have been arrested on arriving in Mongolia. He's got there. Instead of being arrested, as Gerashchenko said, it says here, he's been greeted by guard of honor. Okay, the question is, why go to Mongolia? You could go to all these places that have huge amounts of influence, or you would want huge amounts of influence over because they can give you X, Y, and Z. So why Mongolia? What have they got? It's a random place to go. Of course, it's massively, massively significant. Right, Mongolia cancels Putin's pipeline deal, big pipeline deal. So you know that pipeline that's going through Mongolia that got cancelled last week, was it? Or whatever. Yeah, last week, a week ago. Mongolia cancels Putin's big pipeline deal, and a week later he flies there to bribe the government despite an international arrest warrant. If Mongolia doesn't arrest him, they should be sanctioned into the Stone Age, says Jay in Kiev. Now, I don't know what will happen with Mongolia. I don't know if there's any sort of comeuppance with not adhering to the obligations of the International Criminal Court and the Rome Statutes. It could be that nothing really happens to Mongolia, but they will be under an awful lot of pressure from, I'm sure, from a number of nations. I don't know enough about the geopolitics of Mongolia. I'm sure somewhere said the other day that actually they're quite friendly with the West, Mongolia. Is that what I read? Anyway, this is really, really important, and I wonder whether Putin will be able to put enough pressure on Mongolia or line the pockets enough of people in power in Mongolia that they change direction on that pipeline. It's going to be fascinating to watch out for that because, but it's important to note that this is potentially the sign of someone who is in somewhat desperate straits. Putin is going to Mongolia because he freaking needs to go to Mongolia. You could make a case that Russia are absolutely tanking economically in terms of labor shortages and interest rates and inflation and reserves and gold reserves that are dwindling. We'll come on to that in a second. That he needs money, and he needs money from hydrocarbons because that is dropping. Partly to do with foreign exchange rates and partly to do with etc. So this could be a sign of desperation. That'd be, that's how I would like to see it. Whether that's true, whether it's just like, no, we need that deal. It's not going to kill us, but actually we just need that deal, that pipeline to be built. I don't know. Now, Russia and China have begun using gold to pay for goods due to increasing challenges and with banking transactions, says Reuters. So these difficulties have escalated following the US threats of secondary sanctions. Under the new arrangement, gold is purchased in Russia, transported to Hong Kong, and sold there. The proceeds are then deposited into local bank accounts. To facilitate these transactions, Russian entities have had to hire couriers to physically transport documents across the border to obtain the necessary seals and signatures from Chinese bankers. This is as a result of the US doing a good job, the Treasury doing a really good job in secondary sanctions, and that causing Chinese banks to get jittery about doing any dealings with Russia, and as a result they're now doing deals in Russian gold. How is that affecting the reserves, the sovereign wealth fund, and so on and so forth? Welcome back to the 19th century, says the Dead District. Quote, Russia and China have begun hiring couriers to pay for goods in gold. Russia has begun using gold to pay for goods in China due to those problems with bank transfers. After the US Treasury threatened secondary sanctions, so on and so forth. Anyway, yes, in June, the credit institutions tightened their checks on transactions. One of the working solutions was a scheme with gold. Metal was bought, transported to Hong Kong, where it's sold, and the cash was deposited into local bank accounts. So we'll see if anything can be done about that. Be interesting to see whether anything is possible, whether that breaks any kind of rules, any sanction implementations. Right, Jane Kiev says Russians are being allowed to take over Africa with the aim of restricting its massive resources. from the West and fueling the Russian war machine. Yet another issue that would be solved by merely letting Ukraine win. What's he talking about? Well, Russia is apparently going to ramp things up in Kenya. Now, Kenya is supposed to be now the kind of beacon of US alliedness in Africa, beacon of alignment with US objectives. Now a high-level Kremlin is coming to take up is coming to take up ambassadorship in Kenya, in no doubt Nairobi. That is potentially a sign that Kenya could be next for Russia's influence operations. We've seen them romp through the Sahel region in terms of coup after coup after coup taking place. Is it 7 coups in the last couple of years? And Russia is never far away. Let's hope that the West are able, the EU, the US, UK, able to maintain really good relationships with Kenya, because Africa is becoming, and especially when you see South Africa as a member of BRICS, is becoming more and more of a problematic continent. Now, gas imports from Russia to the European Union have exceeded imports of blue fuel from the US to the EU. The Brussels consulting company Bruegel, quoted by Die Welt. According to published data for the quarter from April to June 2024, the EU bought 12.7 billion cubic meters of gas from Russia and 12.3 billion from the USA. So the USA doing that in terms of liquefied natural gas and shipping that across the Atlantic, and they've been picking up the slack where the Nord Stream pipeline is shut down and gas coming from other ways into Europe from Russia has been restricted, but it still appears that the European Union is exporting more from Russia than from the US. It's hard to wean yourself off, and we know that Slovakia and Hungary are still working hard to, and I presume Serbia, although they're not the EU, are working hard to get gas still from Russia. Prime Minister of Netherlands, Dick Schoof, so he's a newly appointed Prime Minister, part of the coalition between Geert Wilders' PVV and other coalition partners, but he seems to be a fairly decent choice, considering it could have been someone like Geert Wilders. He seems a pretty good choice. He's a former military man, or in charge of intelligence actually, and also to do with immigration, so that could be why he's been put there. He's made an unannounced visit to Zaporizhia, his first visit to Ukraine since taking office. Ukrainian President Zelensky and Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof visited a lesson in a bunker school in Zaporizhia and talked to pupils. During his visit, the Dutch Prime Minister announced a new support package to Kyiv worth over 200 million euros, which will focus on protecting and repairing energy infrastructure. Really good news there. So Zelensky, after his meeting, said that today there is a new support package from the Netherlands focusing on those energy needs. I thank him for all of this. All of these efforts work together to support normal life in Ukraine, social and economic activity, and to enable our people to return to Ukraine from abroad. The greater Ukraine's resilience, the more our people will be able to come back. And of course, that means that they can both mobilize them and add them to the economy from a purely statistical, practical point of view rather than a humane cultural point of view, which is also, of course, important. Now, a citizen of Hungary living in Spain has been arrested by US officials. Bence Horvath is suspected of trying to export military-grade comms equipment to Russia. He was detained in San Francisco 9 days ago. Good news, good riddance. Earlier, a poll has showed that 58.5% of Poles support the shooting down of Russian air objects, such as missiles and drones, that violate Polish airspace. So Sikorski has had an interview in the Financial Times and said that he supports Poland. He says they should be obliged to shoot down Russian aerial threats, I think both over Polish airspace and into Ukrainian airspace. And actually he's got some justification for making those claims, since a majority of Poles feel similarly. So that's really good news there. Now, Helsinki, this is Finland, proposes banning most Russian citizens from buying real estate in Finland. The Finnish government has proposed banning most Russian citizens from doing that to ensure national security, according to Reuters. Good news and strong support there from Finland as ever. Now, there have been 4 mine drilling machines sabotaged in Kiruna in Sweden. Swedish security police SAPO are now investigating. We have seen a number of different incidences across Europe where the Russians appear to have been involved in sabotage. Could have happened in the UK. Well, definitely has happened with a warehouse of Ukrainian stuff or owned by a Ukrainian entity burnt down in London. People paid off by Russia there to do that. We've also seen an explosion at a BAE Systems factory in Wales. Don't know if that was connected to Russia. Then Diehl Defence twice has caught fire in Germany. We've had potential sabotage of rail networks in both Germany and France multiple times. Other places like in Bulgaria, several factories going up in smoke, so on and so forth. The Russians are definitely involved in sabotage operations around the world. And then often kind of smaller ones where you've had, the cutting of cables here and the daubing of symbols in France, particularly there. There's both kind of subtle, I guess, propagandistic sabotage as well as much larger explosions and destruction. So what do we do about that? Are we prepared for Russia doing sabotage? How do we prepare for them doing that? And so on and so forth. Lots of questions. Right. Chris Owicki does a thread on Telegram is under criminal investigation by South Korea's National Police Agency for aiding and abetting the distribution of pornographic deepfake images. Just as in France, it's accused of ignoring requests from authorities which are investigating criminal acts. Now, this is interesting because you don't see people like Elon Musk banging on about how terrible it is that South Korea are doing this. But, France has arrested your Telegram man. We know it's controversial with those free speech absolutists, but Telegram appears to be a bit of a problematic platform. South Korea's Yonhap news agency reports that the case is being prepared against Telegram for aiding and abetting deepfake sexual crimes. Woo Jong-soo, the head of National Police Agency's National Investigation Headquarters, has spoken about it at a press conference. Woo says that Telegram has been ignoring investigators' requests. Quote, Telegram does not provide investigative material such as account information to us or to investigative agencies in other countries, including the United States. The NPA is relying on its own methods. So on, they're going to work with French investigators as well over these sort of deep fake, sexually explicit things and blackmail and criminality. And of course, what's going on with Elon Musk in Brazil is that, there were rules broken and Twitter or X did not help to clear up those issues and refused to give over information or do things that were required by law by Brazil in that case. And yet, you have Elon Musk complaining about Brazil, yet not complaining about China and Russia, where Twitter is banned, outright banned, and has been for some time. It's all just highly controversial. Anyway, Brazil, apparently Twitter will be taken down within 24 hours. I think it's still up. I think they're still trying to do these compromises on it, but as someone says, hard to disagree with this action. The Brazilian authorities are not making unreasonable requests, but because they negatively affect the Brazilian far right, Musk refuses to allow the company to take them. And this isn't about free speech; it's about sovereignty. And then we're moving on to the UN. As expected, UN did not say a word about the recent massive Russian missile attacks in Ukraine. No word, no statement, nothing. The UN has turned into a sleepy and eternal meeting of the Communist Party of the USSR, says Jürgen Naudit, he's managing director, franchisor, international education company, but he's a strong supporter of Ukraine and often has some good analysis. Perhaps a new design of the UN will soon look like the one in the photo, which is basically the old Communist Party. It's slightly worrying there that the UN seems to be rather not just toothless but voiceless in support of what is good and right, and and that which aligns with their own resolutions and articles, etc., and charter. They seem to just be eternally silent on serious issues. Now, Moscow is So what's going on? This is an alarming announcement by Russia. As I reported in March, says Jim Sciutto of CNN, Russia came alarmingly close to a nuclear weapon in Ukraine in 2022 and already has a lower threshold for nuclear use than the US. So, quote, Russia is adjusting its protocols for nuclear weapon use in light of enhanced weapons support for Ukraine, Western support for Ukraine. Russian state media outlet TASS reported, citing Russian government minister Sergei Ryabkov, Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov told TASS on Sunday that Russia is in the advanced stages of work to revise a key document outlining the parameters and conditions for the use of its nuclear arsenal. Under the current document from 2020, Russia has a green light to use nuclear weapons if an enemy, quote, uses such weapons or other weapons of mass destruction against Russia, or if an enemy attack is launched which, quote, threatens the very existence of the state. And then George Barras from the Institute for the Study of War says Moscow is doing this specifically now to influence US policy and deter the US from allowing Ukraine to conduct deep strikes into Russia. This is part of the escalation and anti-escalation chess game that's going on between Russia and the US. Every time there seems to be a bit of a wobble and you think the US might get rid of the restrictions on those weapons being used, and when you have pressure from other entities like the UK and France, for example, and obviously Ukraine, and we hear today Denmark and Finland and other nations too, then the Russians flex their nuclear muscles. As George Barrell says, the timing is not coincidental, especially given when the policy environment debate is. This is for the audience of Jake Sullivan and Joe Biden, I would have thought. And so really frustrating, but that's how the Russians go about their nuclear work, I guess. Now, last thing to mention is that the AfD has done particularly well in East Germany or eastern parts of Germany. These areas that used to be East Germany as a nation have held on to, I think, stronger levels of nationalism and of anti-immigration sentiments. They're not as liberal, open, and maybe progressive as the rest of Germany. However, the rest of Germany is also feeling this, just not quite as much as those in the East. And there have been some statewide elections in the East that have seen AfD, the far right, gaining 30-odd% of the vote, and this is worrying many. Now, reporting on this has been interesting, as in The Economist had an absolutely hilarious headline that lots of people are taking the absolute rip out of. People saying things like, I thought I had a rudimentary grasp of historical geopolitics. And then the Economist, I hold my beer. Like, the hard right takes Germany into uncharted territory. I don't know. I feel like this is very much charted territory for Germany, one of the most analysed periods of human history. But there you go. Germany are looking at a rise of the far right again there. Leaders of the far right Alternative für Deutschland have demanded that their party be included in coalition negotiations in two states where it won nearly a third of the vote in elections on Sunday, in results that have scrambled the political landscape for a year before a general election. Although the political earthquake from the elections in eastern Germany had been long foreseen, the centrist governing parties proved incapable of stopping the rise of the AfD, which came first in Thuringia state with nearly 33% of the vote, and second in Saxony with almost 31%. The three parties in Scholz's unpopular Rainbow Coalition scored single-digit percentage points in a stinging rebuke of voters, leaving another of the EU's main powers, along with France, politically chastened and hamstrung. So this is really, really worrying for many. Valérie Hayer, the French politician who leads a liberal Renew Europe grouping in the European Parliament, called the state results unprecedented and said on Twitter that it was a dark day for Germany a dark day for Germany is a dark day for Europe. So Wolfgang Kubicki, a deputy head of Germany's co-ruling Liberal Free Democrats and one of the German government's fiercest internal critics, said Berlin had itself to blame for the rout. Quote, people have the impression this coalition is hurting the country, and it is certainly hurting the Free Democratic Party. The AfD chapters in Saxony and Thuringia have been designated as right-wing extremists by the security authorities. Sunday's result in Thuringia marked the first time since the Nazi period that a far-right party has claimed the top spot in the state election, raising questions about how long the Democratic parties can keep it out of power by refusing any cooperation. Scholz called the results bitter and worrying. He said, "Our country cannot and must not get used to this. The AfD is damaging Germany. It is weakening the economy, dividing society and ruining our country's reputation." But importantly, the night's other big winger was a new left-wing conservative populist party. Left-wing conservative populist, the horseshoe theory comes dangerously close to being, right-wing populist as well. The Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance, BSW, named after its founder, who broke off from the far left at Die Linke Party last year, leaving it in tatters. The BSW, which calls for higher taxes on top earners, curbs on immigration, and an end to military assistance for Ukraine, scored nearly 16% in Thuringia and almost 12% in Saxony. So you've got the far right doing really well, like sort of 30-odd%, and the far left doing pretty damn well for them at 13, 14, say. So almost half of the population are anti-Ukraine in terms of what those political parties stand for. So AfD and BSW are anti-Ukraine, pro-Russian parties. And that is a significant victory for Putin inside Germany. And it's this connection between immigration and anti-Ukraine positioning that's really worrying, because while I'm not saying immigration isn't a problem in Europe, it is a really sticky issue, but it can be so easily weaponized and co-opted to the Kremlin's own intentions that, it's just really worrying. Anyway, one to keep an eye on as all of this is in some way or another. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate your support. Take care. Let me know what you guys think, obviously, in the threads below, and I'll speak to you soon.